The 34th chapter, Wakana Jo, New Herbs, Part 1. Something was about to break. This is the feeling the story carries into the 34th chapter, not announced, not stated as a fact, present in the air the way a change in weather is present. Before the weather changes, Genji was 40 years old. The world he had built was at its height. The Rokuzyoin stood. The 4 seasons were in their quarters. The women of his life were arranged around him with the precision of something that has been thought about carefully and executed well. He was Dazyo Daijin now, the Grand Minister, the highest official position available. Both emperors had been his guests. The Korean astrologer's words had been proven true in every way the court could measure, and something was about to break. Suzaku was dying, or not dying exactly, not yet, but moving toward the life. That was his real life, the life he had always wanted, and had not yet had permission to live, the life of the retired emperor, who has put down the weight of the throne and taken up the weight of the soul. He had been ill. He had been thinking about the end of the part of his life. That was the official part. He had been preparing, and he had one concern: his daughter, the 3rd daughter, Onna Sannomiya, the young woman who had been the most sheltered of his sheltered children, whose mother had died early, who had no one with the political position to guarantee her future except her father, and her father was about to enter the monastery. He looked at the men of the court. He considered his brother Hotaru prince. He considered other candidates. None of them satisfied. None of them had the combination of position and longevity that a young woman needed in a protector. He thought about Genji. Genji was 50. He was the Grand Minister. He would outlive the political changes. He would outlast the rivals. Whatever happened to the court, Genji would continue to be what Genji was, and the daughter was related to Fujitsubo through the imperial family, through the complicated genealogy of the Heian court. There was a connection. Onna Sannomiya was related to the woman who had been the center of Genji's life. Suzaku understood this. He used it. He approached Genji, not directly at first, through intermediaries, through the careful circling of a request that is not yet a request, but that is moving toward becoming one. Genji heard. He considered. He was 50. He had Murasaki. He had the Rokuzyoin. He had the arrangement of his life. As it was, he did not need another woman. He did not need the complication of a new formal wife. He did not need the particular problems of a young princess who had never been outside the innermost rooms of Suzaku's palace, and Onna Sannomiya was related to Fujitsubo. This is what moved him. Not the position, not the obligation, not even the direct request of Suzaku, though that weighed on him too. The connection, the bloodline that ran from Fujitsubo through the family to this young woman he had never seen the possibility of finding in a face he did not know yet, something of the face he had never stopped looking for. He agreed. Murasaki received the news. He told her himself the next day, before the arrangement was settled, while there was still, in theory, something that could change. He told her, with the quality of a person who is telling something they know will hurt and who hopes that the telling itself is a form of respect. She received it quietly. This is what the story records, and what the story finds significant. She did not rage. She did not weep where he could see. She did not perform the response that the situation might have produced from a woman with less control. She said, "If Suzaku has asked you, then it is a good thing that you can be of use to him." He was relieved. The story notes this. He had expected more. He had prepared for more. The composed acceptance was a relief. What the story also notes, in the way it notes, the things that matter beneath the surface of what is said. Murasaki's composure was real, and her composure was the composure of someone who understood that this could not be stopped, and that the only dignity available was the dignity of not being seen. To fall apart. She was 32 years old. She had been with Genji since she was 10. She had been the center of the compound. She had been everything. That was real. In the arrangement he had built, and now there would be a formal wife, a princess, with a rank above hers, in the rooms above hers, officially above hers. In every way the court measured. She received this composedly. She prepared for the wedding. She organized the household for the arrival of the new person. She was gracious. She was impeccable. And the story carries, beneath the impeccability, the particular weight of something being born. That is too heavy to show. Onna Sannomiya arrived. The third princess, the formal wife, the woman Suzaku had asked Genji to protect. She was 13, or barely more than 13. Genji looked at her. The story is direct about what he found. He found a child, not a woman, not the person he had imagined, the person who carried Fujitsubo's bloodline and might carry Fujitsubo's quality. A child, young in every sense. Her handwriting was childlike. Her conversation was childlike. Her understanding of the world she had been placed in was the understanding of someone who had not yet understood that there was a world to understand. He thought about Suzaku, about how a man of Suzaku's sensibility and education had produced this, the overprotection of love, the particular blindness of a father who had kept his daughter from everything, including the development, that encounter with everything, produces. He went back to Murasaki. The story records this. After the first nights with the new formal wife, he went back to Murasaki. He could not stay away. He had never been able to stay away. And the arrival of Onna Sannomiya, the formal wife who was not what he had hoped, had shown him something about Murasaki that he had perhaps always known, but had not seen with this particular clarity. Murasaki was everything. She had always been everything. The compound and all it held would not be what it was without her at the center. He went back to her. He stayed. He was with her in a way he had not been in the years when the arrangement felt permanent and therefore could be taken for granted. The court watched this and formed opinions. The court was always forming opinions. It said, the new marriage has made Genji more devoted to Murasaki than ever. Murasaki heard this. The story does not say exactly what she thought, but it carries the weight of what a woman hears when the world says her husband is devoted to her, because his formal wife proved disappointing. The devotion that comes from comparison, the love that arrives because something else fell short. Kashiwagi saw her in the spring, the game of Kamari, the football game played in the gardens of the Rokuzyoin, young men kicking the ball with the formal precision of a game that was also a performance. Kashiwagi was there, the eldest son of Tunochujo, the young man Yugiri had grown up with, a serious man, accomplished, who had wanted Onna Sannomiya himself, and had lost her to Genji. The cat came out of the room, a Chinese cat, a beautiful cat, one of the cats belonging to the household. It came running out of the room where Onna Sannomiya was, and as the cat ran out, the curtain lifted. The screen that kept the princess invisible was lifted by the movement of the escaping cat. Kashiwagi saw her for a moment, the length of a curtain lifting and being replaced. The princess in the room, her face, her presence, the specific quality of someone who has been protected from being seen. The game continued. The ball was kicked. The men performed the formal movements of the formal game. Kashiwagi watched the curtain where the princess had been. He was not watching the ball anymore. This is how it started, with a cat and a curtain, with the accidental visibility of someone who was supposed to be invisible. The cat ran out of the room. The curtain lifted. Kashiwagi looked, and everything that followed, all of it, came from that looking. Murasaki became ill. The illness came in the autumn of the same year. The festival, the ceremony, the gathering of the compound's women in their finest clothes for the celebration of music. Murasaki played. She performed. She was at the center of the ceremony in the way she was always, at the center of things, and then she fell in the evening. After the music, she simply collapsed in the way of someone whose body has been carrying more than a body should carry, and has finally put it down. The illness was serious, more serious than anyone wanted to say clearly. The monks were called, the prayers were performed, the rituals that the Heian world knew for these situations were performed with urgency. She improved, then worsened, then improved again, the kind of illness that gives hope and then withdraws it, and then gives it again, in a cycle that is harder to bear than a steady decline. Genji moved to the Nizyoin with her. He left the Rokuzyoin. He left Onna Sannomiya in the formal rooms. He went with Murasaki. He stayed with her. He sat beside her through the days of improvement and the days of worsening. He had always known she was real, the realest person in his life. He had known this, and had sometimes acted on it, and had sometimes let the knowledge sit at the back, while the other things pressed to the front. Now there was nothing pressing to the front. There was only this, the woman in the bed, the illness that might take her, the particular terror of someone who has arrived at the possible end of something they understood only when the ending arrived. Kashiwagi wrote to Onna Sannomiya while Genji was at the Nizyoin, while the compound was running without its center, while Onna Sannomiya was in her rooms without the husband who was never quite there, even when he was there. Kashiwagi wrote. He had been writing. He had been sending letters through an intermediary, a woman of the princess's household who understood the situation and who had decided that her understanding could be useful. The letters were the letters of a man who had decided, who had looked through the lifted curtain and decided that what he had seen was the thing he wanted, and that wanting it with the full force of what he was would eventually produce a result. Onna Sannomiya received the letters. She was not equipped for them. This is the honest truth of the chapter. She was 13 or barely more. She had been raised in the innermost rooms of the most protected palace. She had no tools for this. She did not know what letters like this meant in terms of what was expected. In response, she kept the letters. This was the mistake, not answering, not sending them back, keeping them in the soft place, under the bedding, where a young woman who did not know what to do with something put it when she did not know what to do with it. Murasaki almost died. The story says this plainly. She stopped. For a moment, the breath, the presence, everything that was Murasaki stopped. Genji held her. He did what people do when they are holding someone who has stopped. He spoke to her. He said her name. He said the things that cannot be said through screens or in the careful language of the court. Then she came back. The monk's prayers, the monk's efforts, something. She came back, breathing again, present again, Murasaki again. The story notes what was said, that what had taken her to the edge was the spirit of Rokuzio who had been dead for years, who had died at peace, or as much at peace as she could, whose daughter was in the imperial household, who had asked Genji to keep his promise. Rokuzio, who had loved Genji, with a love too intelligent for its own comfort, who had become a spirit while she was alive and had apparently not stopped being one. When she died, her spirit was in the room, had been in Murasaki, had been taking Murasaki toward the place that Rokuzio herself had gone. The monks drove it out, or the prayers drove it out, or something drove it out. Murasaki came back, and Genji held her, and the compound breathed again, but nothing was the same. Murasaki had been to the edge. She had seen something there. What it was exactly, the story does not say. But the story says that after the illness, after the almost, she began to think about what she wanted that she had not yet asked for. She wanted to take her vows. She wanted the gray robes. She wanted the life of someone who has set down the particular weight of loving someone like Genji and has found a different weight instead. She asked. He said no. This is the moment that the story gives particular weight to. She asked to leave the world that was pressing on her, and he refused because he could not imagine her leaving, because the thought of Murasaki in gray robes beyond the arrangement they had made was a thought he could not hold. She said nothing more. She accepted his refusal. She put down the asking and went back to being what the compound required, but she had asked, and the story holds the asking. The asking is in the story. The refusal is in the story. Both are there, and what follows is the story asking what it costs when someone who has been held asks to be released and is not released. The 35th chapter, Wakana Ge, New Herbs, Part 2, Kashiwagi found a way in. This is what the second half of the Young Herbs chapter is about, the finding of a way, the particular determination of someone who has looked through a lifted curtain and decided that looking was not enough. Genji was at the Nizyoin, still with Murasaki. The illness had improved, but not resolved. She was better. She was not well. The improvement was the kind that required continued attendance, continued presence, continued care. He was there, not at the Rokuzyoin, not with Onna Sannomiya. Kashiwagi had found the intermediary, Kojizu, a woman of the princess's household, the daughter of the nurse who had served Kashiwagi's family and who now served Onna Sannomiya, the connection that made the impossible possible, the human link between two people who were not supposed to be linked. Kojizu arranged the meeting, found the night, found the gap in the household, the gap that existed because Genji was elsewhere, and the compound, without its master, was a compound differently arranged. Kashiwagi came into the room where Onna Sannomiya was. He had been carrying this for years, from the moment of the curtain, through the letters, through the refusals, through the marriage to another woman, the sister, the second princess, Onna Sannomiya, whom he had taken, not because he wanted her, but because having her kept him near the family that contained the person he wanted. He had been carrying this, and now he was in the room. Onna Sannomiya was not willing. The story records this in the way it records these moments, without dwelling, without concealing. She was not willing. He came anyway. This is what happened. The night passed. The morning came. Kashiwagi left. Onna Sannomiya was changed by what had happened, in the way of someone who has been changed by something they did not choose, who now carries the fact of it in the room of themselves. That was not prepared for something like this to be there. She was 14, or barely more than 14. She was the third princess of the retired emperor who had loved her more than was useful to her. She had no tools for any of this. She kept the letters that had kept coming. After that night, they kept coming. She kept them in the place under the bedding, the soft, wrong place. Genji returned to the Rokuzyoin. Murasaki had recovered enough that his presence at the Nizyoin could be reduced. He moved back. He performed the duties of the head of the household. He visited the women. He maintained the arrangement. He visited Onna Sannomiya. She was different. He noticed the child who had always been, simply and completely, a child with no layers to read, no complexity to navigate, was different. She would not meet his eyes. The quality of her presence had changed in a way that was not quite articulable, but that was there. He noticed. He filed the noticing. He did not yet understand what he was noticing. Then she was pregnant. The news came, or rather the evidence came, the body showing what the body shows. When what had happened, Genji received the news. He was the husband. He received it as the husband receives it, with the expected response, the appropriate acknowledgement. But inside, something was working, the calculation that a man makes. When the fact does not match, the possibility, he had not been with her at the time that mattered. He had been at the Nizyoin. He had been with Murasaki. He had been away from the Rokuzyoin for the length of time that the timing required. He sat with the calculation. He did not act on it yet. He waited. He watched. The letter, he came to visit her, on a day when she was somewhat better, when the illness of early pregnancy had eased enough that she could receive him in the regular way. He sat with her. They spoke, the stilted, careful conversation of two people who have never found a genuine register to speak in. He adjusted his position. He reached for something. His hand touched the edge of the bedding, the soft place, and there was paper there, a letter, folded in a handwriting that was not his. He did not take it out immediately. He did not read it in the room. He moved it. He put it somewhere. It would be with him when he left. He left. He read it. The handwriting he recognized. He had known Kashiwagi since Kashiwagi was a child. He had watched him grow up. He had been at the game of Kamari when the cat ran out and the curtain lifted. He had seen Kashiwagi's face. In the moment of the seeing, he had not understood what he was seeing then. He understood now. He read the letter carefully, all of it, the way a person reads something they have already understood, but need to understand again, more completely. Then he sat with what he knew, the particular quality of this moment. Genji, who had loved Fujitsubo, Genji, who had gone to Fujitsubo in the night when she was away from the palace, Genji, who had produced the child that became the emperor, Genji, who had spent 40 years carrying the secret of what he had done, and now the son of his oldest friend, in the rooms of his wife, the letter in his hand, the same act, the same shape, the same impossible weight. Now on the other side, he did not feel only outrage. He could not feel only outrage. The outrage was real. The violation was real. His wife, his household, the thing that should not have happened. But underneath the outrage was something else. The recognition, the mirror, the particular knowledge of a person who has done something and who is now sitting with the evidence of what it looks like when it is done to you. He said nothing directly. He did not summon Kashiwagi. He did not confront Onna Sannomiya. With the letter, he did not perform the accusation that the situation called for. He found other ways, smaller ways, the particular cruelties of a man who knows and is letting the knowing do its work slowly. He spoke to Kashiwagi and company at a ceremony, at a gathering. He made remarks, careful, subtle remarks, the kind of remarks that are not quite anything to someone who does not know, and are everything to someone who does. Kashiwagi heard. Kashiwagi understood. The blood left his face in the company, in the ceremony. He understood that Genji knew. Kashiwagi broke. This is the word the story uses in the way the story uses words for things that happen when what a person has been carrying becomes too heavy to carry anymore. He went home. He stopped going out. He stopped eating. He stopped being able to do what the day required. He lay in his house, and he was the man who had done what he had done, and who had been seen doing it by the person it most mattered to not be seen by. His wife came. His father came. His friend Yugiri came. Yugiri sat beside him. He tried to understand. The illness had no visible cause. The illness was the weight of what Kashiwagi could not put down and could not carry. Kashiwagi could not tell Yugiri. He could tell him almost everything. He could approach the shape of what it was without saying what it was. He said something about having done something that could not be undone, about the terrible clarity of being seen by the person whose seeing was the thing you most feared. Yugiri did not understand fully, but he understood enough to stay, to sit beside him, to be the friend that the situation called for. The child was born, a boy, healthy, small, held by the mother, who had not chosen what the child represented. Genji looked at the boy who was not his, the boy who was Kashiwagi's son by his wife. He felt what he felt, something complex enough that the story cannot name it simply. Not love, not hatred, the particular quality of looking at something that is the consequence of everything that has been done. The mirror again, the boy in front of him, and the boy he had produced 40 years earlier, the emperor who had grown up believing he was someone else's son, and this child who would grow up believing he was Genji's son, the same secret given back to him in a different form. He named the child Kaoru, the fragrant one, named for the particular quality the child had even as an infant of seeming to carry a scent. That was not ordinary, that was not entirely of this world. The name was Genji's, the child was not. This is the weight the child called Kaoru would carry for the rest of the story. The name from one man, the blood from another, the secret underneath both. Onna Sannomiya asked to take her vows. She had wanted this before the birth. She had wanted to leave, to put on the gray robes, to step outside the world that had put her in this position and done these things to her without her consent. Genji had resisted. He had said the usual things, the things he had said to Murasaki, the things a man says when the women around him try to leave the arrangement he has built. Then Suzaku came secretly, the retired emperor, from the monastery, through the dark. His daughter had written to him, or he had been told, or he had known, with the knowing of a father who has been worrying about his daughter since the day he decided to leave. He came to the Rokuzyoin. He sat with his daughter. She asked him, in the room, with Genji present. She said she wanted her vows. She said it directly, which was the most direct she had been in all her time at the compound. Suzaku said yes, before Genji could say no again. He called for a monk. In the room, in the night, the hair was cut. The vows were taken. Onna Sannomiya became a nun. In the room, in the presence of both men. Genji watched. He could not stop it. Suzaku had the authority, the father, the retired emperor, the man who had entrusted her to Genji's protection, was the man who was now releasing her from it. The monk left, Suzaku left, Onna Sannomiya was in the gray robes. Genji looked at her, the formal wife, the princess, the woman for whom he had agreed to be responsible, in the gray robes now, beyond the arrangement, beyond him. He had thought the same thing about Murasaki when Murasaki had asked. The thought of the gray robes ending the arrangement. Now the gray robes were here, and the ending was here, and the thing he had been unable to imagine had happened anyway. Rokuzyo's spirit was present. This is what the story says about the vow taking, that the spirit of Rokuzyo was the force that had driven Onna Sannomiya to the vows. Rokuzyo, who had loved Genji badly, who had taken Yugao, who had almost taken Murasaki, who was dead and apparently not finished, the spirit that had moved through the years, attaching itself to the women in Genji's life and pressing on them in the direction of the ending. Onna Sannomiya took her vows because Rokuzyo was there. This is the story's explanation. And also, Onna Sannomiya took her vows because she had been placed in a marriage she did not choose, because the husband was never quite present, because something had happened in the night that she had not chosen and that had produced a child she carried with the particular weight of what it was. Both explanations are in the story, the supernatural and the natural, the spirit and the circumstance. The story holds both, as it holds everything. The 36th chapter, Kashiwagi, the oak tree. The oak tree does not bend. This is what the oak tree is known for, in the tradition that gave Kashiwagi his name, the oak that stands in the wind, the way other trees do not stand, that holds its shape, that does not yield. Kashiwagi was not bending, he was breaking. There is a difference between the two. Bending is the movement of something resilient, something that goes with the force and returns when the force passes. Breaking is what happens to something too rigid to bend, something that held its shape, until holding it was no longer possible. He had held his shape through everything, through the years of wanting what he could not have, through the marriage to the wrong woman, through the night that had happened, and its morning, and all the mornings after, he had held his shape, until Genji's remark, in the ceremony, the quiet remark, the careful, subtle remark, that said, without saying, that Genji knew. After that, the shape gave way. He was lying in his house, the house that should have been, the house of his wife, and his position, and the continuation of his life, in its expected form. He was lying there, not eating, not receiving visitors, beyond the ones he could not refuse, not performing the duties of the day that his position required. His mother came. She sat beside him. She said the things that mothers say when they do not know what is wrong and cannot fix it and can only be present. His father came, the retired Grand Minister, Tuno Chujo, now in retirement, now the man who had been Genji's oldest rival and was now simply an old man, watching his son dissolve. He sat beside him. He said his own things, different from the mother's things, the things of a father who has been proud and cannot reach his pride's object with the pride anymore. Yugiri came. They had been friends since childhood, the sons of the two great rivals, Genji and Tuno Chujo, who had been friends themselves. Despite the rivalry, the friendship reproduced. In the next generation, Yugiri sat beside Kashiwagi. He could see the dying, not immediately, but moving toward it, the way a person moves toward something that has decided to come for them. He asked what was wrong. Kashiwagi said, I have done something, something that I cannot undo, and someone knows. The person who matters. He did not say what, he said the shape of it, the weight of having done something, and having it known by the person whose knowing was the only thing he had been afraid of. Yugiri listened, he did not press. He was a man of great loyalty and great reticence. He would not push into territory. His friend had not opened. He stayed. He sat with him. He listened to what Kashiwagi could bring himself to say, and he received it with the quality of a friend who does not require the full account to give the full presence. Kashiwagi thought about Genji. He had admired Genji his whole life, the man his father competed with, the most extraordinary person of the generation above his own. He had watched Genji's life, the brilliance of it, the compound, the arrangement, the women, the position, the way Genji moved, through every situation, with the quality of someone who has been given every gift and has learned to use them without waste. He had wanted Onna Sannomiya. He had lost her to Genji, and then he had taken her anyway, in the night, in the room, while Genji was at the Nizyoin. He lay in his house and thought about what he had done and thought about Genji. On the other side of the same thing, he did not know about Fujitsubo. He did not know the secret that had been the engine of everything. He knew only his own act and the weight of it, but the weight itself contained something that he could feel without being able to name. The sense that there was something in Genji's response that was not only outrage, something in the careful remark at the ceremony that held more than the obvious. He could not access it. He was too far inside his own weight to see outside it. He lay in his house. The weight held him there. He wrote to Onna Sannomiya. He kept writing. Even after everything, the letters still came. Kojizu still carried them. The connection that had made the impossible happen was still there. Onna Sannomiya was in gray robes now. She was a nun. She had taken her vows. She was beyond the arrangement. He wrote to her anyway. He said things that a dying man says when the dying has made directness finally possible, when the performance of what he was supposed to be had been given up, along with everything else. He said, "I think of that night. I cannot stop thinking of it. I know I should not have. I know what I did. I do not know how to be someone who did not do it." She received the letters. Kojizu urged her to respond. She wrote back, reluctantly, in the way of someone who finds even the act of responding a form of returning to something she had left. She wrote carefully, nothing that confirmed, nothing that denied, the response of someone who is writing, because not writing would be its own statement. He held her letters in the house, in the lying down. He held them the way. He held the cat. That had been her cat, the Chinese cat, the cat that had started everything by running out of the room. He had gotten a cat from the same breeding. He held it. He told himself it was the same as holding her, that the cat was a connection. The cat curled against him, warm, present, indifferent, the way cats are. Genji did not come. The retired Grand Minister came. Yugiri came. Many people came. Genji did not come. This is also noted, the conspicuous absence, the man who had every reason to come and visit, the dying son of his oldest friend, who did not come. Everyone noticed. The noticing said something about the relationship between the two men that no one was saying directly, but that everyone was calculating. Genji stayed away. He sent a message, the appropriate formal sympathy, the words that said what they were supposed to say, without saying anything else. He could not go. This is the truth beneath the absence. He could not sit beside Kashiwagi and perform the role of the concerned older man, with the weight of what he knew and the weight of the mirror pressing on him simultaneously. He stayed away. He sent the message. He let the absence say what the absence said. Yugiri was there at the end, or near the end. He came and sat. Kashiwagi was past speaking clearly. He was in the place. That is neither sleep nor waking the place that people occupy. When the body is deciding, he managed some words, the way people manage words. From that place, a few clear things, surrounded by the unclear. He said something about the flute that had been his, a particular flute. He wanted Yugiri to have it. He wanted it given to the right person. He said something about the woman at the Ichizyo house, the woman called Ochibanomiya, the second princess, his wife, the woman who was not, the woman he had wanted, who had been the woman available, while he waited for the woman he could not have. He said, "Look after her. After I am gone, she has no one, and I have not been what I should have been to her." Yugiri listened. He heard the flute request. He heard the request about Ochibanomiya. He stored both of them in the part of himself that kept the things that needed keeping. Kashiwagi died in the spring, the way the story says it. Plainly, without ceremony, he died. He was young. The story does not pretend otherwise. He was a young man. He had position. He had intelligence. He had the particular beauty that the Heian court valued, and that the story had given him from the beginning. He had done something he should not have done. He had carried the weight of it until the weight was too heavy, and the weight had done what weight does when it is too heavy. For too long, the oak tree that would not bend, that held its shape, that was too rigid to accommodate the force that came, broke. Genji received the news. He sat with it. He had not gone. He had sent the message. He had maintained the distance. And now the distance had become permanent. There would be no confrontation. There would be no full account. The thing that happened would never be spoken in the direct language between the two people. It happened between one of them was dead. Genji sat with the news. He thought about the young man who had looked through the curtain, who had written the letters, who had found the way in, who had done what he had done. He thought about himself, the same age, the same act, the same weight, carried differently. Kashiwagi had broken under it. Genji had not broken. He had carried it for 40 years. He was still carrying it. He did not know whether this made him stronger or simply harder, whether the not breaking was a virtue or a different kind of failure. The weight was the same weight. The act was the same act. The difference was the person. He thought about the boy Kaoru in the rooms of Onna Sannomiya, the gray-robed mother, and the boy who would grow up with Genji's name on him and Kashiwagi's blood, the same shape as before, 40 years ago. The same secret, different people, the world turning and returning to the same forms. The flute came to Genji before it went to the right person, before Yugiri fulfilled the dying man's request. It came first to Genji because he was the master. of the household, because the flute's journey passed through him. He held it, Kashiwagi's flute, the instrument of the man who had done to his household what he had done to Fujitsubo's household. He held it. He thought about the shape of things, how they return, how the world makes the same situations out of different people, how what you do comes back, not always immediately, not always to you directly, but back in some form to someone. The oak tree, the name that was the tree that would not bend, the man who broke instead, the flute in Genji's hands, the spring outside, the compound continuing, Kaoru in the rooms of the gray-robed mother, the wait going on, as it always went on, as the wait always does. The 37th chapter, Yokobue, the flute. The flute arrived at Yugiri's house. He had fulfilled the request. Kashiwagi had asked him to take the flute. He had taken it. He had brought it home. He had placed it where things were placed, when they needed to be held, until the right moment for giving them. The flute was beautiful. A Chinese flute, the kind that was called Yokobue in Japanese, the side flute, held horizontally, played sideways. It had a tone that was the particular tone of very fine instruments, the tone that comes from the material and the making, and the years of playing that have entered the wood and stay there, even when the player is gone. Yugiri looked at the flute. He thought about Kashiwagi, who had played it, who had played everything well. Music was one of the things Kashiwagi was known for, music and bearing and the quality of attention, the things that made up what the court called accomplishment. All of it gone now, the accomplishment, and the playing, and the man who had been, the place where those things lived, a dream. Kashiwagi came to Yugiri in a dream, not the way the living come, the way the dead come, when they come in dreams, with the particular quality of being present and being past at the same time. He was there. Yugiri saw him, and Kashiwagi said something about the flute going to the right place, about what the flute was for. Yugiri woke. He held the dream carefully, the way the Heian world held dreams carefully, not as random noise, as communication, as the method by which the dead spoke to the living when they had something left to say. He thought about where the flute should go. Kashiwagi had said the flute should go to the right person. He had said it in the dying. He had said it in the dream. Yugiri began to understand that the right person was Genji. He brought it to the Rokuzyoin in the autumn, an autumn evening, the kind of evening that the Heian world associated with grief, the thin moon, the insects in the grass, the particular quality of autumn light, that is the light of things ending. He brought the flute to Genji. Genji received it. He turned it in his hands. He held it the way a person holds an object that belongs to a history. They have been inside, and that holds the record of the being inside. He played it, a few notes, quietly, not a performance. The testing of sound, the listening to what the instrument said when it spoke, the sound was what it was, the quality of Kashiwagi's playing in the wood, the years of the man who had played it before it passed on. Genji spoke about Kashiwagi, not about what had happened, about the man, about what Kashiwagi had been. He said he was remarkable. I watched him grow up. I have known people of his quality. In my life, not many. The particular combination of intelligence and accomplishment, he said it is a loss, a genuine loss, the kind that the court does not replace easily. He said these things with the quality of a man who means them, not performed, not the courtesy of speaking well of the dead, because speaking well is what is done, genuine, the genuine grief of a man who has complicated feelings about a person, and who, with the person gone, finds that the complication has not removed the grief, but has simply made it harder to understand. Yugiri listened. He received these words about his dead friend from the man who had been the reason for what his dead friend had done. He did not know this. He did not know what Kashiwagi had told him in the abstracted, approaching language of the dying. He did not know about the letter. He did not know about the night. He heard Genji's grief, as simple grief as the grief of a man who had lost someone he had watched grow up. Kaoru was brought in, the boy, the child of Onna Sannomiya and Kashiwagi, who was in the world as Genji's son, who would spend his life in the world as Genji's son. He was brought into the room for Yugiri to see, for the acknowledged purpose of showing the child to a visitor. Yugiri looked at him. He looked at the child, who was supposed to be Genji's son. He thought nothing yet. The child was an infant. Infants look like infants. The resemblances take time, but the story notes the moment. The story knows what Yugiri will eventually notice, what he will eventually think, and not say, what he will carry without saying, because some things are too large and too dangerous to say. The flute was in the room. The child was in the room. Genji was in the room. Yugiri was in the room. And in the room, in the autumn evening, in the thin moonlight, all four of them were present. In the particular way of the story, all four connected by the thing that had happened, and the things that were happening, and the things that would happen because of all of it. The flute went to Genji. This is where Kashiwagi wanted it. In the dream he said so. In the dying he meant it. The flute belonged to Genji, not because Genji was the greatest player, not because the flute was most at home in Genji's hands, because the flute held what Kashiwagi could not say directly, and what Genji could not ask to receive, the acknowledgement, the passing from one man to another of something that carried the weight of what they shared. What they shared was the act, the same act, the same impossible weight, carried differently by different people with different outcomes, but the same, underneath the same. The flute said this in the way that objects say the things that language refuses. It passed from the one to the other, from the one who had broken to the one who was still standing, from Kashiwagi to Genji, through Yugiri's hands, who did not know what he was carrying. The autumn continued. The insects in the grass, the moon in the thin sky, the Rokuzyoin holding what it held, Murasaki in her rooms, better than she had been, not well, but here, still here. Onna Sannomiya in her rooms, in gray robes, with Kaoru, the boy who carried two men's stories in the one body, and Genji, with the flute in the autumn, playing or not playing, holding it, thinking about what it held, about the long arc of things, about how what you do comes back, about how the shape of things repeats, the flute in his hands, the autumn outside, the moon, the story moving forward toward what the story had been moving toward since the beginning. The 38th chapter, Suzumushi, the bell cricket, she was in gray robes. Onna Sannomiya, the third princess, the formal wife, the woman who had been given to Genji's protection by the father who loved her more than was useful. She was in gray robes now. She had taken her vows. She had stepped out of the world that had done what it had done to her, and into the other world, the world of the temple, the world of prayer and sutra, the world where what had happened could be offered up to something larger than itself. She was still in the Rokuzyoin. Her rooms were still her rooms. The compound had not changed around her, only she had changed. The gray robes, the cut hair, the particular stillness of someone who has set down one kind of weight and picked up another. Genji came to her rooms. He came in the autumn, the evening of the first cricket calls, the bell crickets, Suzumushi, the insects that sing with the particular tone that is the sound of autumn. In the Japanese tradition, thin, clear, persistent, the sound of something continuing to make itself heard after the warmth is gone. He had planted the garden with the plants. That attracted the bell crickets. Not recently, long before this, as part of the arrangement of the compound, the seasonal details that made each quarter what its season required. He came to hear the crickets with the woman who was no longer his wife in the ways that mattered and who was still here. They sat, he on one side of the screen, she on the other, the same screen, the same arrangement, as if nothing had changed, as if the gray robes had not changed anything, except what they changed. He spoke to her about the garden, about the crickets, about the evening, and its particular quality. He was kind. This is what the story notes. He was kind to her in the autumn evening, with the crickets calling. He had not always been kind. He had been many things. He had arranged the fireflies. He had been away. He had let the weight of what he knew press on her in the small ways that were harder than the direct ways. But in this evening, in this chapter, he was kind, perhaps because she was in gray robes, because the robes had removed her from the arrangement and therefore from the position of someone who could be used or managed or pressed. She was simply here, a person in gray robes in the autumn, and he was simply here, a man who had done what men do and who was sitting in the garden he had made, listening to the crickets he had planted for two people in the autumn on either side of a screen, with what had happened between them and around them, sitting in the air like the sound of the crickets, present, acknowledged, unreversible. He made a poem about the bell crickets, about the evening, about what it meant to be here now in this season with this particular combination of things. He said something about the voice of the cricket being the voice of the autumn, the voice that comes when the warmth is leaving and says, the warmth was here, it was here and it is going, but I am still calling. She answered with a poem of her own about the dew on the grass, about the way the dew collects in the night and is gone by morning, about what it means to be the dew. He heard her poem. He received it. She was better at this than she had been when she arrived. The child bride who could not write had been writing in the gray robes the vows had given her, something the marriage had not, the space to become, the person the space allowed. The priests came later that evening for the religious observance, the reading of sutras, the ceremony that was the ceremony of a person in gray robes. On a regular evening, Genji stayed to hear it. He listened, the low voices, the regular rhythm of the sutra, the sound that is the sound of a particular kind of presence, not the cricket's presence, the presence of something that has been going on much longer than the crickets, than any particular season. He sat in the garden, outside the screen, and listened to the sutras, coming through the screen, from where she was, the crickets outside, the sutras inside, both continuing, both their own kind of calling. Kaoru, the boy, came to the screen. He was toddling now, old enough to move through the rooms on his own small legs. old enough to appear at the edge of things. He appeared at the screen. He said whatever small children say when they appear at screens, something about the crickets, something about the sound. Genji looked at him. He was looking at the boy, more and more carefully now. The way he looked had a quality of reading that the boy was too young to understand was happening. The boy had a quality, something about him, a particular sensitivity, the way he attended to sound, the way the cricket calls, seemed to reach him differently than they reached the ordinary child. He was not ordinary. Something about him was not ordinary. This is Kaoru, the fragrant one, named for the scent that seemed to come from him without any source, the scent that was his from the beginning, the mystery he carried in his body without knowing why he would carry it into the next part of the story, the part after Genji, the part that is the story of what Genji's world produced. For now he was small, standing at the screen, listening to the bell crickets with the gray-robed mother on one side and the man who was not his father on the other. Genji thought about his life. In this chapter, sitting in the autumn garden, listening to the crickets and the sutras, looking at the boy he had named and did not create. He was 50 years old, more than 50. He had built the compound. He had had the arrangement. He had been what the court called the most extraordinary man of his generation. And here he was in the autumn garden with the woman who had come to him as a child and left him as a nun, with the boy who was not his, with the crickets that had always called and would always call, regardless of who was listening. He thought about what had been gained and what had been lost, and whether the gaining and the losing were separable or whether they were the same thing, seen from different angles. The compound was beautiful. Murasaki was alive, recovering, still here, still the center. Kashiwagi was dead. Onna Sannomiya was in gray robes. Fujitsubo was dead. The son who was not his son was on the throne. The weight of what was gained and the weight of what was lost were not balanced. They were not supposed to be balanced. This was not the kind of thing that balanced. He sat in the garden. He listened to the crickets. He listened to the sutras. The autumn evening continued around him, as autumn evenings do, regardless of who is in them, regardless of what is being thought in the garden by the man who made it. The bell cricket calls. This is the chapter. The bell cricket. The thin, clear, persistent voice. The voice that comes when the warmth is leaving. It does not ask whether you are ready for the cold. It does not adjust its calling to the condition of the listener. It calls from the grass in the dark as long as the season allows. Onna Sannomiya in her gray robes was calling in her own way. the sutras, the prayer, the persistence of someone who has found the thing she was made for after a long time of being used for other things, and Genji in the garden, listening to the crickets, to the sutras, to whatever the autumn was saying, to the man who had been the center of the world and was now simply a man in a garden in the autumn, both of them calling in their different registers, both of them continuing as long as the season allowed. The 39th chapter, Yugiri, the evening mist. Yugiri kept the promise that Kashiwagi had asked him to keep in the dying, in the last conversation, in the words that came through the mist of what was ending. Look after her after I am gone. She has no one. Ochibanomiya, the fallen leaves princess, the second princess of Suzaku, the woman Kashiwagi had married, not because she was the woman he wanted, but because she kept him near, the family that contained the woman he wanted. She had known this, or she had not known it exactly, but she had known the shape of it, the way a woman knows when she is the substitute for someone else, when the attention she receives has the quality of attention directed at something through her rather than at her directly. She had lived in this. She had not complained. She had maintained the household. She had been what a wife was supposed to be, and Kashiwagi had been less than he was supposed to be to her, and then he had died. Yugiri came to visit in the spring after Kashiwagi's death, the official condolence visit, the visit that was appropriate for a man of Yugiri's position to make to the widow of his oldest friend. He came to the Ichizyo house where Ochibanomiya lived, with her mother, the Ichizyonomiya Sundokoro, the mother and daughter, in the house that was now the house of grief, rather than the house of a household. He sat with them. He said what was to be said, the formal things, the expressions of grief that the court had developed for exactly these occasions. And then he came back, the next time and the time after. He began to see her, not in the way he had seen Murasaki, through the disordered screen in the typhoon. That had been involuntary. The storm had disordered things, and he had seen. This was different. He was coming back and looking with the particular attention of someone who has begun to look. Ochibanomiya was not the kind of beautiful that announced itself. She was quiet. She was gray in the way of someone who has been wearing the muted colors of mourning for long enough that the muted colors have become her colors. She was not remarkable. She was real. This is the quality that was drawing Yugiri back, the realness, the particular quality of someone who has had a difficult thing happen to them and who has not disappeared into it or performed not being in it, but who is simply in it, present, in the difficulty, real. His mother, Hujitsu Bonon Yogo, had opinions about this. Not Hujitsubo, the woman of the story. Different. Yugiri's mother, who watched her son visiting the widow of his friend with increasing frequency. She said things. Mothers say things. She said, "You are a married man. You have kumoi no kari. You have children. What are you doing at the Ichizyo house this often?" Yugiri said the appropriate things. He was fulfilling Kashiwagi's request. He was looking after the widow. He was being a good friend. To the memory of his friend, his mother was not entirely convinced. Mothers are rarely entirely convinced by the appropriate things. They hear the thing beneath the appropriate thing. She said, "Be careful." He said he would be careful. The letter that was intercepted. Kumoi no Kari found a letter from Yugiri to Ochibanomiya, or a letter that had come from the Ichizyo house, the evidence of the correspondence that had developed alongside the visits. Kumoi no Kari was not a mild woman. She had been waiting for Yugiri for 6 years when they were young. She had waited with the certainty of someone who had decided. She had married with the certainty of someone who had finally received what they had decided on. She had children now. She had the household. She had everything the 6 years of waiting had been waiting for. And there was a letter. She was furious. The story is direct about this. The fury was real, and it expressed itself directly. She did not manage it with the elegant composure that the court valued. She was simply furious. She moved. She left the house. She took the children. She went to her father's house, the retired Grand Minister, Tuno Chujo. She went home, as Murasaki had gone, from her own situation to a different situation, and refused to come back. Yugiri came after her. Of course he came after her. He had waited 6 years for her. He was not going to let her go. Over a letter. She would not see him. The father's house received him at the gate and said she was not available. He stood at the gate, in the position he had been in years before, when the carriage took her away, and he had stood there and decided to wait. He was not waiting this time. He was trying to get back what he had, different from the waiting. The waiting had been for something he did not yet have. This was for something he had built and was losing. He wrote to Ochibanomiya, not love letters, or not only. The letters had become something. That was not exactly what Kumoi no Kari feared, and was not exactly what it was pretending to be either. He was drawn to Ochibanomiya. He could not entirely explain the drawing. She was the widow of his friend. She was quiet and real. She was in difficulty, and he had been asked to look after her. And in the looking after, something had grown that was larger than looking after. He went to the Ichizyo house one night, the night of a heavy autumn mist, the evening mist. Yugiri, his name. He had been named for this quality, the mist that comes in the evening and obscures and reveals, and is neither the clear day nor the full dark. He went in the mist. The mother would not let him in. Ichizionomiya Sundokoro, the mother of Ochibanomiya, a woman of strong opinions about what was appropriate and what was not. She had opinions about Yugiri's visits. She had been managing those opinions because the visits were legitimate, and the alternative was leaving her daughter without the only person who had volunteered to care. But this night, this late, in the mist, with what the visits had apparently been building toward, she said no. Yugiri was outside, the Ichizio house in the mist, the gate, the woman inside, who was not coming to him. He composed himself, he wrote, he sent poems in, the language of the court, applied to this situation, the situation of a man, at a gate, in the evening mist, calling to someone inside. Poems came back, from Ochibanomiya, restrained, appropriate, the distance maintained, in the language of the poem. He stayed, too late, later than was appropriate. The mist thickened around him. The house was quiet. The poems had stopped coming. He went home eventually, through the mist, back to the household, where Kumoi no Kari was not, because she was at her father's house. The resolution, it is not a clean resolution. The story does not offer clean resolutions. In the lower volumes, Kumoi no Kari came back, eventually, after the demonstrations of contrition, after the letters, after the particular negotiation of a marriage that has been stressed and that both parties have too much invested in to abandon. She came back, not entirely forgiving, but back. Ochibanomiya was not abandoned. Yugiri had made the promise to Kashiwagi. He kept it. He continued to provide for her. He continued to be present in the ways a protector is present. But the mist had defined the limit. The mother at the gate, the poems coming back through the closed screen, the house that would not open. He had stood at the gate. He had sent his poems in. He had been given poems back. He had not been let in. The mist had defined it, what it was, and what it was not, what could happen, and what would not. This chapter is called The Evening Mist, Yugiri, the name of the man who was the evening mist, who moved in and out of things without ever quite being in them completely, without ever quite being outside them. The mist that comes at evening and obscures, and in the obscuring reveals something about the nature of what is obscured, the house that is more present in the mist than it is in clear light, because the mist shows you only the outline, and the outline is the essential thing. Ochibanomiya in the mist, her outline the essential thing that Yugiri had seen through the visiting and the letters and the gate at night, a real person in real grief quietly present in it. That was all. That was what it was. That was also more than enough to keep the mist moving toward the gate. The 40th chapter, Minori, the Law. Murasaki was dying, not in the way of the almost dying. That had come before, not the illness that came and went, and came again, and gave hope, and withdrew it. This time was different. The body that had been managing the illness for 2 years had reached the limit of what managing was possible. The chapter is called Minori, the Law, the Dharma, the Buddhist understanding of how things are, of impermanence, of the nature of what arises and passes. Everything that arises passes. This is the law. The flower that opens, closes. The light that comes, goes. The person who is here will not be here. This is not a tragedy. This is the law. Murasaki understood the law. She had been living with the law. For 2 years, she had been asking to take her vows, to enter the gray robes, to make the understanding official. Genji had not let her. She had lived with that too. The spring. It was spring when the story brings us into this chapter. Murasaki arranged a ceremony, the release of living creatures, the Hojo-e, the ceremony in which captive creatures are freed, birds, fish, anything that has been held, set free. She arranged it with the particular attention of someone for whom the ceremony is not symbolic, but is also exactly literal. Who is thinking about what it means to be held and what it means to be released? She was beautiful. The story returns to this. At the end of her life, in the spring, in the ceremony, she was beautiful. Not the beauty of health, the beauty of something that has arrived at its essential form, that has been reduced by illness and time to what was always most itself. The cherry blossoms were falling. She had arranged to see them. From where she was, the cherry trees of the spring garden, her garden, the garden that had been given to her because she was the spring. She looked at them. She made a poem. She said, "I wonder if I will see another spring of these blossoms. I wonder if this scattering is mine to see again." The poem was given to Akashi Mokimi through an intermediary, the woman in the winter rooms, the mother of the daughter Murasaki had raised. Akashi Mokimi received the poem. She understood what the poem was saying. She wrote back. She said something about the blossoms that fall and the blossoms that come again, and the question of what remains. 2 women across the compound making poems about the cherry blossoms, about what remains. Genji was there. He was there as much as he could be. He had been there through the 2 years, through the improvement and the worsening and the improvement again. He was there for the ceremony. He watched her arrange it. He watched her in the spring garden. He watched her look at the blossoms. He had always loved her. He had known this, and had not always acted on it, and had sometimes let the knowing sit at the back while other things pressed forward. Now there was nothing pressing forward. There was only this, the woman in the garden, the blossoms falling, the poem she made. He made a poem too. He said something about the blossoms and the wind, about how they go together, how you cannot have the falling blossom without the wind that takes it, how this is not a cruelty. This is what it is to be a blossom. She heard his poem. She received it. She was past the point of needing him to say these things, but she received them because he was saying them, and because the receiving was a form of being with him. In the last way available, Yugiri came, the son of Aoi, the son of the woman Genji had not loved the way she deserved until it was too late. Yugiri had always loved Murasaki in the only way that was appropriate, as the woman who was the center of his father's household, as the person who had held things together when things needed holding. He came to see her. He saw her. The story notes this moment, his seeing of Murasaki in the final time, the same beauty that the typhoon had shown him through the disordered screen, still there, diminished in some ways, more essential in others. He looked, he felt what he felt, he received what the seeing gave him. He stayed. She asked again to take her vows. She had asked before. She had been refused before. She asked again, not as a request that expected to be granted, as a statement, as the person who is dying, saying the thing that has not been said, as directly as it needed to be said. I want to take my vows. This is what I want, before I go, to have said the words, to have made the intention official. This is what I want. Genji said he would arrange it. He said he would find a monk. He said he would let her. He was saying it in the way of someone who is not sure he can do it, but who has heard finally what is being asked, who has understood that the refusal was a cruelty not intended as a cruelty, but a cruelty he had refused her because he could not imagine her leaving. He could not imagine the gray robes on the person who was the center, but the robes were not the leaving. The leaving was coming. Whether or not there were robes, the only question was whether she would leave, having been heard or having been refused. She did not make it to the vows. This is the weight of the chapter, the weight of the timing. He said he would arrange it. He was going to. He was going to find a monk and have the ceremony and give her what she had asked for. And before he could, she was gone. In the autumn, after the spring of the ceremony, after the summer that was not a recovery, she died in the autumn, with Genji present, with Yugiri present, with the compound, and all it held, present around her. She died without the vows. the thing she had asked for, the thing he had not given her, and then, too late, agreed to give. She died without it. Genji's grief. The story does not perform it. It does not describe the dramatic expression, the wailing, the collapse. It describes the stillness, the particular stillness of someone who has arrived at the thing they feared most and is in it, and there is nothing to do but be in it. He held her, or he sat beside her. He was near her in the only way still available. He called her name. He said things that the story does not fully transcribe, things that belong to the room and not to the record. Yugiri wept. The story says this: the son who was not her son, who had loved her in the only way he could, who had seen her beauty twice, once through the storm, once in the spring, he wept, and the weeping was the weeping of someone who has received something real from a person, and who knows that the person is gone, and what was received is now the evidence that the person was real. The compound after. She had been the center. This was true. Everyone had known it. She had organized the compound, the way the keystone organizes the arch, by being in the right place, by being the right thing. Without the keystone, the arch does not fall immediately. The stones hold for a moment, the shape holds, and then the compound held, the stones held. The form was still there. The women were still in their quarters. The seasons were still in their seasons, but the center was empty, and the compound knew it, and Genji knew it, and the story knew it. This is the chapter called Minori, the law that everything passes, that the flower closes, that the light goes, that the person who is here will not be here. Murasaki was not here. The cherry blossoms had fallen, and the spring had not come back with her in it. The spring came, the blossoms came. She was not in them. The law, what she left the compound, she left the spring rooms, she left the daughter she had raised, who was now at the palace as the mother of the crown prince. She left the woman in the winter rooms, Akashi Mokimi, who had sent poems across the compound about the cherry blossoms, who had given her daughter to be raised here, who had watched Murasaki raise her daughter, and had been grateful, and had been sad, and had been both at once. She left Genji. This is what she left, that the story carries forward, the leaving of Genji, the Genji who had never been, without her presence, as the organizing principle of the compound, who now had the compound without the principle. He would not last long after her. The story carries this knowledge into the chapter not stated, known, the way the end of things is known, when the center is gone. He would not last long, but the story was not done with him yet. One more chapter, one more season, One more year of being Genji, without Murasaki to be Genji for. The law. The law that everything passes, including Genji, including the story, including the world. It had taken 50 chapters to build, but not yet. Not in this chapter. In this chapter, she is still freshly gone. The blossoms have fallen, the compound is still, and the law has spoken in the plainest way the law speaks, with the absence of someone who was there. The 41st chapter, Maboroshi, the wizard. He did not leave his rooms much now. This is how the last chapter of Genji begins, with the shrinking of the world, the compound that had been the measure of everything he had built, 4 seasonal quarters, 4 women, the full expression of his life, had become smaller. He did not go to the autumn quarter, he did not go to the winter quarter, he did not move through the compound the way the compound required. He stayed in the rooms that had been the spring rooms, Murasaki's rooms, the rooms that held the most of what was gone. A year passed. The story says this: a year passed after her death. The seasons came and went. Spring became summer. Summer became the autumn she had died in. The autumn became winter. And then spring again. Each season was the season. Without her in it, the cherry blossoms, the summer heat, the bell crickets, the snow, all of it continuing, all of it the season it always was, without the person who had been his evidence that the seasons were worth attending to. He watched the garden. This is what the chapter gives us, more than anything else. Genji watching the garden, the spring garden, her garden, the garden that had been designed for her season. Cherry, plum, wisteria, the garden that had been. The most beautiful garden in the capital. He watched it from the room, from where she had watched it, from the place where her presence had organized the watching into something more than observation. Without her, it was only beautiful. The beauty was still there. The garden had not changed. The blossoms fell the way they had always fallen. The light moved across the water the way it had always moved. But the beauty was no longer addressed to him, or he was no longer the person it was addressed to. Something had changed in the relationship between him and the beautiful garden. The garden continued. He was watching from outside it. He burned her letters, all of them, the letters she had written to him. Over the years, the letters she had sent. When he was at Suma, the letters from the years of the compound, everything. He burned them one by one, or in groups. He read some before burning, others he did not read. He simply burned. This is the act that the chapter holds up as the act that says what the chapter is saying. The letters were her, in the only form. She still existed. The words she had put on paper, the handwriting, the particular quality of her language, the voice that was still there in the written form, even after the voice itself was gone. He burned them, not because he wanted to lose her, because he could not bear to leave them, to have them outlast him, to have someone else open them after, to have the particular privacy of what was between them become the property of after. He burned them. He kept her with him, in the fire, in the smoke that rose from the letters and went where smoke goes, the wild goose. In the autumn of this year, a wild goose flew over the garden, not unusual. Wild geese fly south in the autumn. They have always flown. They fly in formation, making the particular call. That is the sound of the season, changing. Genji watched the goose. He made a poem. He asked the wild goose where it had come from, whether it had flown over the capital, where she was, whether the place she was now was a place the wild geese flew over, whether she could still be reached somehow by the creatures that move between here and there. He knew she could not. He was not asking a question he expected answered. He was speaking to the goose, the way a person speaks when they have no one left to speak to, using the goose as the occasion for the voice, for saying her name, for saying, I am still here, I am still looking at the garden, I am still speaking. The new year, the ceremonies came, the new year required certain things, the visits, the poems, the acknowledgement of the turning. He performed them with the quality of someone for whom performing was what was left, the life that continues in the form of its performances, the ceremonies that say, the year has turned, we are still here, the world is still the world it was, he was still here, the world was still the world, and also she was not here, and the world was not the world without her. Both true in the new year, in the ceremonies. Akashi Mokimi came from the winter rooms. She came to see him in the spring. They had not been close exactly, not in the way of people who share their daily lives. She had been in the winter rooms. He had been in the spring rooms. Murasaki had been between them, in the structure of the compound, in the arrangement. Now Murasaki was not between them, and Akashi Mokimi came. From the winter rooms to the spring rooms to the man who had been on the other side of Murasaki. All these years he received her. They talked about the daughter, the Akashi Himegimi, who was at the palace, who had given birth to the crown prince, who was the fulfillment of everything the Akashi Nyudo had spent his life preparing for. Akashi Mokimi had outlasted so much, the coast of Akashi, the giving up of the daughter, the years in the winter rooms, all of it. She had outlasted it. She was here. There was something in the coming that was not only about the daughter, that was about the two of them, the two people who had survived the arrangement to arrive at this, The spring rooms, the talking, the garden outside. He thought about becoming a monk. He had thought about it before. He had thought about it when he was young and the court was pressing on him, when Suma was approaching, when the weight of what he had done and what had been done to him was the kind of weight that makes a person think about the life that sets it down. He thought about it now, more seriously, with the particular seriousness of someone for whom the things that kept him here were thinning. Murasaki had been one of the things. She had been the main thing. He had refused to let her go into the gray robes because he could not imagine being here without her. She had gone anyway, in the only direction he could not follow, and he was still here, discovering what here was. Without her, the gray robes were looking like the only honest response to the world as it had become, the world without her, the garden that continued without the person. It had been a garden for. The chapter ends. The story ends Genji's part. Without ending it directly, there is no death scene, no final poem, no last act of the man who has been the center of 50 chapters. The story simply stops, telling his story. There is one more chapter in the source text called Kumogakure, the hiding in the clouds, and that chapter has no text, a title, no text. The hiding in the clouds. This is how Genji ends in the manuscript tradition. He hides in the clouds. He goes where the clouds go. The story does not follow. This is the most honest ending the story could give him. The ending that says the things that matter are not always the things that can be written. The ending that says he was here. He was real. He was the most extraordinary person the court had known, and he is gone now, in the way that extraordinary people go, without ceremony, without the final scene. He hides in the clouds. The story looks away. What Genji was, the story has been making this argument for 41 chapters, making it in the form of a life. He was born in light, the child whose beauty made the Korean astrologer say, "This person should have been a king." He reached toward what he could not have. Fujitsubo, the impossible center, the love that organized everything else around the impossibility of itself. He built the compound, the arrangement, the world of 4 seasons and 4 women, and everything else that the compound contained. He lost Kashiwagi in the compound, Fujitsubo in the spring of her 37th year, Murasaki in the autumn of the year after. He remained in the spring rooms, watching the garden, burning the letters, asking the wild goose, and then he hid in the clouds, and the story looked away. What remains? Kaoru, the fragrant one, the boy with the mysterious scent, the boy who believed he was Genji's son, who was not, who carried 2 secrets, his origin, and the weight of being, the person, the story. would follow next. Yugiri, the evening mist, the dutiful son who had loved Murasaki in the only way possible, who had kept the promise to Kashiwagi, who had stood at the gate in the mist, Akashimokimi, in the winter rooms, who had given the daughter away in the snow, who had outlasted everything, who had come to the spring rooms, in the end, and the compound, the Rokuzyoin, the Four Seasons, the garden, the cherry blossoms that fell every year, whether or not there was anyone, in the spring rooms to watch them, the wizard, Maboroshi, the word means illusion, dream, the one who works with the unseen, the one who moves between worlds. In the poem that gives the chapter its title, a court wizard is described as someone who can travel to the place where the dead are, who can cross the border between here and there, who can bring back messages. Genji is the wizard. He is the one watching the garden, asking the wild goose, burning the letters, moving in the space between the person who is here and the person who is gone. Not magic, not the supernatural, the ordinary grief of a person who has lost the center of their life and who is living in the space the center left, moving in that space, making poems in that space, burning letters in that space, the wizard, the one who knows both sides, who has been here long enough to know what here is, who has loved the person gone long enough to know what gone is, who hides in the clouds, who goes where the clouds go, who is not followed. The spring garden continues, the cherry blossoms fall, the light moves across the water, and the story moves on, without him, into the next part, the part after Genji, the part that his life made possible. Maboroshi, the wizard, the dream, the one who hides in the clouds.